All right. It's Security Weekly News. So welcome to the news for the week of 30 August 2020. Tesla, Slack, Charming Kitten returns, CryptoCibule, which I have no idea how to say, but it sounds good to eat, and tweets from the great beyond. All this, and Ian McShane from CrowdStrike joins us on this edition of Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
And now the news. So Tesla was the target of Russian nationals. So that we talked about the story last week, but I wanted to follow up on it because they actually revealed this week who the target was, which was Tesla. So Tesla's Nevada site had a Russian national who was trying to pay an employee of Tesla to plant malware inside the Gigafactory. So that was, they talked about that last week without the Tesla part. They do keep calling the guy a hacker, which kind of gets on my nerves because as nearly as I can tell, he didn't actually hack anything. I mean, maybe you could call him a hacker in the sense that he's like socially hacking or something like that. But basically what he did was he just used old school espionage tricks and hard, cold cash in the form of $1 million. And so he offered a Tesla employee $1 million and the employee, so this must be like how nice it is to work at Tesla because the employee turned down the $1 million, and then he turned Igor KryptoCibule into the FBI. So, okay, so please, quit calling him a hacker. He couldn't even get somebody to take $1 million to put malware inside Tesla. So, but anyway, after his arrest, KryptoCibule did claim that he had received a $4 million ransom previously from, and now, so we can continue this story, an unnamed company that he had previously targeted with ransomware. He was arrested at LAX on the 22nd of August. All right, just when you thought it was safe to post that meme in Slack, you know who you are. Well, maybe not. An RCE that is in versions below 4.4 can give an attacker full control of your Slack desktop app. So the attack is a cross-site scripting with an HTML injection, which, I mean, nothing new there, except that everybody kind of always goes on about Slack being really secure. But you might want to update your Slack app if you are, like doing stuff on there that you don't want everybody on Earth to see or get blackmailed, or maybe some Russian hacker will come in and hit you up, to get your Slack information. Apparently, Slack paid a $1,750 bug bounty for finding this problem previously. I did put links to all that on the site if you want to read more about how that attack works and so forth. Charming Kitten is an Iranian and awesomely named advanced persistent threat. They apparently are now back and targeting Israeli scholars and U.S. government employees using WhatsApp and LinkedIn. This story was pretty widespread. I actually got asked about this earlier today by someone who said, do you think any of these LinkedIn blind ads might actually be a problem? And I was like, yeah, it could be. The current Kitten approach is to pose as a writer for Deutsche Welle or some other media outlet. So they were using several different media outlets. Some of them were like Israeli journals. Some of them were Deutsche Welle sites and so forth. And then they basically used LinkedIn and WhatsApp to arrange contact by email. They also were creating fake profiles on LinkedIn so that they could point the victims to their LinkedIn site to validate that they were legit and so on. And then they were using LinkedIn messages to communicate and so forth. The link, of course, course, that they send you finally is a phishing page, which steals your credentials. The twist is that it does appear as a legitimate part of the Deutsche Welle campaign in a waterhole type attack. Charming Kitten has been operating for a while, but this is a new and dangerous tactic, and academics and government employees love to talk to the press sometimes. And so, when you get that big contact, go, hey, you've made it. You're going to be famous. You're going to be on our journal. We're going to put you on the cover. It's a full 5-page nude spread. I mean, I'm all over that. So, and speaking of Iran, Iranian hackers believed to be another part of the government, or maybe even the same Charming Kitten group, were observed targeting the CVE 2020-5902 vulnerability, which, if you don't memorize all the CVE numbers of the year, which I'm sure most of you do, but if you don't, that was the vulnerability that allowed takeover of the F5 big IP routers. So that was put out way earlier this year, but now it does appear that this government-sponsored group, this one's called Pioneer Kitten, is targeting the routers. The report from CrowdStrike said they were focused on intelligence gathering in Israel, North Africa, and North America. The group has also been called Parasite, UNC 757, and Fox Kitten. I don't know what it is with Persians and kittens, but, don't you even patch, bro? I mean, come on. The New Zealand Stock Exchange has been dealing with a distributed denial of service attacks this week, and the government has now brought in the NZ spy agency, which is called the GCSB. The GCSB has a dedicated branch that is called the National Cybersecurity Center, and that's center with an RE instead of an ER, which is focused on, cybersecurity. NZ stock markets have had to stop trading due to the severity of the attacks, but they have been ongoing, and possibly there was some suggestion they were related to the freezing of another Russian national's assets in New Zealand. So back in June, they froze Alexander Venek's assets. He had about $90 million that were frozen in New Zealand for money laundering purposes, and he was arrested in France. He's still in France, but the U.S., France, and Russia are all fighting in court to see who gets him. So everybody wants a piece of this guy. It didn't say that the New Zealanders were trying to get him. Maybe they don't want him. They don't like anybody to come there that might end up staying. So they're probably just as happy if he gets extradited somewhere else. But they got his money. He's been charged in the United States with multiple fraud and money laundering, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The attacks in Kiwiland have been attributed to Fancy Bear and the Armada Collective. So I don't know if this is related to the same person or what. At the same time, the New York Stock Exchange and other major exchanges in the world responded to inquiries about this type of denial of service attack, and basically they all said they were not vulnerable. The venerable Lee Neely of Security Weekly fame sent me this story and asked if it was a kind of call out to Fancy Bear, like Fancy Bear, come out and play, kind of thing. Does anybody still get that reference to the Warriors? I mean, that's where that meme comes from. If you don't know, it was an old movie called The Warriors. I see that meme all the time, and I just didn't know if anybody still gets the David Patrick Kelly meme is the guy's name. That was the actor. But anyway, regardless of that, the New York Stock Exchange and others said that their trading platforms are so segmented and isolated from the public internet that it would be very, very difficult for such attacks to succeed there, which makes some sense. Stephen Manley from Druva said that the NZ attacks took only about 50,000 device bots to be successful, and that it was an example of how hackers of this sort were going after low-hanging fruit, which, okay. A new malware family was revealed this morning. I feel like Marlon Perkins. It's like, we found them. They were living in this nest. Isn't it beautiful? But researchers at ESET named a new Trojan malware, KryptoCibule, I don't know how you say that, and said it was I'm sure that some of our friends from Eastern Europe will call in and tell me how I mispronounced that, but regardless, it was primarily targeting Czech and Slovak users. It's a Trojan that spreads through torrents. And so it uses all sorts of different tactics to siphon crypto coins from the infected devices, and it also uses Tor and other common tools that people may have on their systems anyway to try and hide from detection. So it mines, it subs out wallet addresses in your clipboard and steals your cryptocurrency, and it also steals cryptocurrency-related files. With all that, it does still, make this real effort to hide from detection, and by using all these legitimate tools. Apparently, it was encountered as far back as 2018, but now has sort of resurfaced and is in current use. The main torrent source is uloz, uloz.to, IO, is a popular file sharing site in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. I did put story links to all that, so if you want to see how it works and all that, it's all in there. There is a lot of discussion today about governments pushing companies to put everyone back in the office. So if you're home with 2 school-age children and you have a special desire to see the school reopen, even if it involves, child-sized hazmat suits and things, I do get it. I mean, it's my daughter's at home taking classes and so forth. But with that in mind, I have a special guest today. Ian McShane, who is the Vice President of Product Marketing from CrowdStrike, is going to join me, and we are going to talk a little bit about government forcing people back into offices and what that may mean for the IT and security staff when everyone comes back. But will they really come back? I mean, there's sort of a whole, a changing world out there in terms of how and what this is going to look like after we get done with the pandemic. Hi, Ian. Welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, man? Nice to be here. How are you?
I'm fine. It's great to have you here. It's always fun to have guests and that can talk about some of these things. You told me that you were particularly interested in talking about the idea of how we deal with this, and I know that certainly I got a lot of calls when this first started happening from people saying, "What do we do?" And they all started sort of retooling and trying to replan. Now I'm seeing the other thing, and when you mentioned that, I was thinking, boy, that's spot on, because I've been getting calls at the same time now from people saying, okay, people are sort of coming back. Now, I haven't had the call saying everyone's coming back. I've had the call going, some people are coming back. And so now all the IT and CISO people are sort of trapped in this no person's land in between, in the building, off-site, and oh yeah, now I'm here sometimes and not here sometimes. So I thought that was something of interest to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny listening to the news there. You listen to ransomware, social engineering, vulnerabilities, low-hanging fruit, as you put it.
Yeah.
Nothing really changes but the shoes, right? But at the same time, everything's changed. And I mean, to your point, I think there's this whole kind of folks have been working from home for a long time. And now we're getting back into, well, what does this mean for the future? And organizations are really starting to think, well, how do I plan for a future that is so uncertain, where maybe not all of my staff are going to come into an office. Maybe I'm going to have to shut some offices down, right? I think there's going to be that hybrid model. I think realistically, that's what needs to be embraced.
I mean, it did get forced. I mean, for years and years and years, people are saying, "Oh, our company can't operate with people off-site. They have to be in the office every day from 8 to 5 or whatever." And you certainly saw that traditional thing. Universities were the same way. I mean, for years and years and years, I've been saying I could do this class from anywhere, and I think it would be effective. Oh no, it's not possible. It can't be done. It's impossible to develop that. But all of a sudden, it was like it went the other direction. So I'll ask you a couple of questions. So what was the biggest threat you saw from the complete at-home thing, and then what do you see as the biggest threat from the now whatever we want to call this next thing, which is the evolution of people coming back to the office but not?
The hybrid office life, or work from anywhere, I think is a good.
Is that the term? I mean, I was wondering if there's a nice term for that. I think that's the term I've heard.
I don't know if that's the term. Let's go with it. So I think the biggest issue, certainly that I know a lot of customers that we spoke to suffered from, was, funnily enough, the lack of hardware. Right? If you think, I think most folks like us, maybe in technology, are used to everyone you work with, and certainly for the last couple of decades, I've worked from a laptop. But there are folks that go into an office, turn their desktop on, and then go home. And so the biggest problem, I think, was figuring out, number one, is there enough hardware in the world that we can actually get hold of some stuff? And number two, if there isn't, what's the contingency? And how do we secure that kind of stuff? How do we take home devices? How do we solve this decades-old issue of bring your own device overnight?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, the question I started getting immediately from people when people started going home back in March and April was, and it was a bit shocking to me, and because I and I realized my naivety at that point, where it was exactly what you said, was people were saying, I don't have, I even heard one that said, I don't have an internet connection. And then I also heard from people that said, I have a dial-up internet connection. I mean, I was like, those still exist? But apparently they do. And so there was that one. There was the hardware of, I have a laptop, but it doesn't have a camera, that kind of thing. From the university side, it was professors saying, my classroom has a chalkboard, but it doesn't have a camera and a microphone and a recording component to it. And then, of course, at the higher level organization, I was getting, how do we pay for all these resources that we now need, which was storing all this video, tracking all this. And then, of course, the real issue being the security issue. But I think as we go back, don't you think there's a huge issue as we go back?
There definitely is. And I mean, I think we're very privileged, I think, to work for any organization. I think is privileged to be able to supply hardware almost on demand and get that cash. But you touched on the education side of things. It's like, how do students access this if they don't have reliable internet, if they don't have their own device that they can use when they need to or when they want to? And so I think there's a lot of issues that have been solved before you even get to security, or there are a lot of issues that need to be solved before you even get to security. But now we're here. I mean, I kind of personally get frustrated with folks talking about phrases like new normal and other things that don't really make sense.
I was going to call the segment that, actually. I was going to call it Ian McShane Brings the New Normal, but I decided not to do that.
I'm lost for words that I can use on a public broadcast, but thanks. I appreciate that. I'm glad you didn't, and please don't. But I think the fact is that organizations now got to the point where they've been able to continue to transact, right? And my heart goes out to the ones that couldn't. But organizations have put some things in place. They put their band-aids in place to get folks working from anywhere, from wherever they can, wherever they feel safe, whether that's at home, whether that's in the garage, if that's sat in the car in the driveway getting 5 minutes peace. But they've put these things into place. And now, as organizations start to figure out how to get people back in the office, I mean, it's a good time to stop and think, right, what have we done? What have we done that we want to stay the same, and what do we need to change? What was a band-aid, and what is going to become permanent?
Yeah, I really agree with that, because I think that we're just starting to get those questions being asked, because I think a lot of upper management thought, okay, this will happen, then it will stop, and everything's going to go back to the way it was, 50 years ago, just overnight. And it's not going to, because I'm already seeing pushback from teachers. I'm seeing pushback from office workers who are saying, is it possible for me to now work from home 3 days a week? Because I don't really understand your argument that this wasn't effective, because I did do my job and I did it just fine. And it saves me 2 hours driving each way if I don't have to drive in there or ride the train or whatever. What do you think? I mean, what do you think the biggest problem is going to be as we go into this hybrid world?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there as well. I mean, sometimes it's not even possible for folks to work productively at home, right? People in house shares that are, maybe in small apartments that have 2 or 3 folks trying to work from home, it can get frustrating. It's the opposite problem to me, where I hate the silence of working at home all the time. And I would dearly love to have some kind of socially distant interaction near an office, maybe not inside one. But you think about the amount of money that organizations have probably spent already. Like our CEO, George Kurtz, likes to tell the story, or has told the story on earnings calls, of one of our customers that had this 3-year or 2-year digital transformation roadmap that they executed in a matter of days in March. And they've invested heavily in this, and it would not make sense for them to start rolling that back and forcing individuals back into the office.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I've certainly seen, like the university. I mean, my university, which is not very large, has invested a large amount of money in modernizing every classroom on campus. I mean, literally, they went in there and did stuff people have been saying you should do this for years and years and years, and they were like, oh, we really ought to put, these features into the classroom. Now they're pressuring, and the students are not going to go back either, because the students are being offered this sort of deal where it's like, well, the professor will record the class, so if you couldn't be there, you can watch it later, and it's like, my daughter was already complaining because when her school switched over in March, almost all of it was asynchronous. And she really liked that asynchronous class because she could do it when she felt like doing it, and she still got really good grades, and she still felt like she learned something, but she could also do the trick my students taught me about my lectures, which was they run them on 2 times and 3 times if they're kind of bored. Okay, but now when you tell the students, okay, here we go, we're going to go back, I'll put my powdered wig and my mortarboard back on, and we'll get the chalkboard out again. I'm not sure that's going to happen, and I think the same thing's going to happen at companies where people are saying, I can have a meeting on Zoom at 7 in the morning. I know I have done this for years because I've always had clients all over the world, and and I didn't necessarily get to fly to Singapore because somebody wanted to meet with me for an hour, although I did a couple of times, which was kind of cool. But it was like, well, can you fly? In fact, I flew to London once on very short notice because a client was like, we want to meet with me, and I was like, okay, where? And they were like, London in the morning. I was like, okay, that's going to be expensive, but sure, why not? I get to have lunch in London.
It's a great commute.
Yeah,
I think you're totally right. It's a funny thing to think about of how things change so quickly. And I think organizations at some point, if they haven't already, are going to have to acquiesce and say, you know what, we can't force folks back into the office. Sure. I'm sure there are roles that have to be done in the office. I can't think of a good example, but I guarantee someone smarter than me can. So that means there's this hybrid approach, right? And trying to figure out how can we have visibility, to throw a buzzword out there. How can we have control? How can we understand what's actually happening on all of our workloads, all of our devices, whether it's endpoints, whether it's cloud stuff, whether it's application? It starts to make me think about how security professionals have now got 3 things, I think, to care about. Right? They've got the endpoint, they've got the data, and maybe the identity. Now, I don't necessarily think that having 3 things makes it any easier to secure or control or implement any of the 3, but at least you can kind of look at these buckets and start to figure out, right, what do I need to be able to secure and manage my endpoints? How do I control my identities and prove my identities? And what do I need to do to secure my data so it doesn't show up in an S3 bucket somewhere?
Do you think that that companies that don't try to grow from this are going to get left behind in the next couple of years?
I think it's inevitable, right?
Yeah.
I think the cost savings from scaling down the amount of office space that you're going to have is going to be substantial. But on the other hand, coming back to what you said about governments asking companies to bring people back into the office, it's also got a long-term impact on, I guess, local economies there as well. So I similar to you, I've worked remotely for a couple of decades, so I've fully embraced the remote lifestyle. But it's going to be interesting to see how other companies can do the same thing.
Well, yeah, there was a story in the New York Times a couple of days ago, maybe it was on Sunday, but they were talking about the flight from New York City. And, and initially when I saw the headline, I went, oh, yeah, this is everybody's afraid of the virus or whatever. But the reality was people were realizing they could get remote jobs and they could move to cheaper places to live. I mean, New York City's great, just like London is great, but there's a lot of negatives to living in London or living in New York City. And, it's expensive and it's crowded and there's a lot of traffic and what have you. So, of course, I will say this. I've known a lot of people who said, forget it, I'm moving to New Jersey. And, 18 weeks later, they're like, I need to get back into New York City because I really don't like living in Clinton, New Jersey. Sorry, Clinton. It's a beautiful place, but, it's not Manhattan either.
And you know what? That opens a whole new door of things like social engineering. How many folks are going to be targeted with job opportunities to work from anywhere? Just to tie it back to stuff never changes. Everyone's got all of this stuff to go onto, and they've still got to consider ransomware. They've still got to consider vulnerabilities. They've got to consider social engineering, but they've got to figure out how to solve against that when everyone is goodness knows where. Exactly.
So just to wrap this up, what would you say you think the biggest focus of security professionals should be as this sort of starts to untransition back into whatever the new thing is? I won't even say it, but whatever we get to coming up. I mean, what do you think the biggest thing that security professionals should focus on should be?
Really, having a look at what you use, what's critical to your organization's security today? And how effective is that if your employees can be in dozens or hundreds of different locations all at once? And can you continue to get the same level of effectiveness and security if they're not connected to your corporate network? Look for something that is cloud-centric, cloud-native, to use a wonderful term, and really figure out how you can support this move before you get asked to do it overnight. You know, these digital transformation roadmaps or plans that had been sitting around in the CISO's pocket for a couple of years as they figured out how they did it or what budget they needed to execute on it. They happened overnight, so don't let it catch you out. I think this work from anywhere is the way forward.
That's what I've been telling anybody that called me and asked. So when, I had a CEO call me and say, what do you think, is going to be like? And I said, well, this just sped up something that was already happening. And so grab onto the cloud and hang on to it now, because that was there already. It was coming. You were going to have to do it in the not too distant future, but now it's here whether you like it or not. So you might as well go ahead and just let's just dive right in and start breathing the fumes of the cloud and getting that in our head. All right.
Exactly.
No, please go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ian McShane, for joining us from CrowdStrike. If you want to know more about CrowdStrike, go to securityweekly.com/CrowdStrike, and we have a link there so that you can get more information. Ian's always a great guest to have, and I appreciate your time today. And
thanks so much.
Yeah. And finally, so what do we do when someone's no longer alive, but they keep tweeting? The discussion of how to handle a person's digital effects, I don't know what the right term would be, has been going on for years. So there's always been a lot of controversy and discussion about what happens, when you slough off this mortal coil, but you leave a massive online presence. What happens to all that? I mean, when my father, who was not a massive tech person, but when he died, he left a huge array of digital effects that existed. And how do you not just even memorialize it, but what do you do with it and how do you manage it? It was a little bit stranger to me than handling his worldly possessions, which were all very well organized and planned for. But when we got into the digital side of it, it was like, wow, here's Facebook and all these other things that, what do you do with all this? Well, so what if you had a very valuable Twitter account that had a lot of followers? Well, Herman Cain, often candidate for president of the United States and a famous CEO, died in July of this year. But on August 12th, his account began tweeting against Joe Biden and taking a political stance. It creates a lot of controversy about verified tweets and verified users of other social media platforms that say this is the real whomever, and now they're tweeting after they are deceased. It's worth a read on this article because I think it's an interesting thing that probably some of us are going to have to deal with as in corporate as well, because we're going to have employees who will be deceased and they're going to have digital remains inside of our organization and outside that we may need to keep track of. Thanks to Ian McShane again for joining us. Anytime, Ian, you want to come on. That's the news for now. In the time of plague, I'm Doug White. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Security Weekly. I'll be back Thursday afternoon this week with the Security Weekly News wrap-up. And I will tell you what conspiracies you need to believe at that time.